Okay, American federal government. We're on to chapter 12, and chapter 12 is campaigns, elections, and voting. Some of the themes from this chapter compare and contrast presidential and congressional elections and explain the incumbency advantage. With regards to congressional elections, and presidential elections, they have primary and they have runoff elections and then general elections. I think we talked about that gerrymandering within the system has often made them much less competitive in the general election. We definitely have seen that. Sometimes you have open primaries. Oklahoma, the Republican Party is a closed primary, but the Democratic Party, they did this several years ago. Their numbers had become so small, and in order to try to attract independents, they allowed independents to vote in the Democratic primary. But that just depends state to state on that. Also, elections, you have initiative and referendums. The best example of referendums in Oklahoma certainly is medicinal marijuana. That passed. And you'll see referendums come up from time to time, and it is a way that voters can get things on the ballot without having to go through the legislature. For years, of course, the legislature was never going to pass medicinal marijuana, and so there's an end run around that, and that is the referendums or initiative petitions. And that is where it goes to the voters. And so you'll see that happen from time to time. Presidential elections, we're already well into the presidential campaign. It's important to remember, though, for the 2024 election, not a single vote has been cast yet. And you won't see a single vote cast until January and February coming up. So we talk about how much of a lead that Trump has, which he does in polling and everything else. But until the votes are cast, nothing has been set in stone yet. So it'll be interesting to see if Trump can sweep through the primaries like he did in 2016. Of course, 2020, he was the incumbent. On the Democratic side, of course, Biden is the incumbent, and he's not facing serious opposition. And so he shouldn't have a problem winning unless something really drastic happens. But I can't imagine, because by now somebody should have gotten in. And the only person in is Robert Kennedy, and he's Robert Kennedy Jr., and he's more of a fringe candidate. You know that we have the Electoral College. The Electoral College means that you're really not one person, one vote. So people in Wyoming have a much greater say for president than people in California because of the Electoral College system. And that's because they get 3 electoral votes, even though their population is smaller than some districts in California. And so that's why you've seen 2 elections now in the last 20 years, the 2000 election and then the 2016 election, where the winner of the popular vote did not win the election. It was George Bush against Al Gore, and of course Donald Trump against Hillary Clinton. And that's because rural voters have more power in their vote. And you see a much greater rural-urban divide politically than at any other time. And that's shown in figure 12-1 on 296. People like to point that map out, and they talk about how big and that's the 2020 election. But you understand the reason that's so red is because nobody lives in the red section. I say nobody, but I mean comparatively. There are very small populations there compared to the cities. An important part of elections is to understand incumbency advantage. On one of your assignments, I asked if you approve of your local congressperson, And then I ask if you approve Congress as a whole. And like everyone else in the country, they're like, oh, most of you were like, not all of you, but most of you were like, yeah, I approve of my congressperson, but I hate Congress. And it's like, well, how can Congress be doing so bad when everyone likes their own congressperson? And that's the incumbency advantage. I had students that wrote things like, well, Josh Brasheen, our representative, or Senator Langford, they came and visited my school and I liked them and stuff. And there's such a huge advantage in that, because if you're trying to run against them, first of all, nobody knows who the heck you are. And second of all, they already have that experience of being in Congress, and they can send out mailers and flyers. And so incumbents win the vast majority of the time. It takes a lot to unseat an incumbent, and it has to be one of those toss-up districts. It has to be one that's close. So there's a huge incumbent advantage. And that tends to go for presidents too. They talk about how campaigns are organized, and a campaign is a massive, massive undertaking. Even at the congressional level, and even at the local level for local state representative, it's a massive undertaking. Consultants, communication directors, pollsters, and everything. They talk about the roles of the convention in the debates. This is interesting because I don't know if you've noticed, but the Republicans have had debates, and Trump has sat out the first one, actually the first two. He sat out the first two, and I don't know that he's going to ever get into one of the debates because he has such a big lead. He says he doesn't need to, and thus far it's not negatively impacted him. So for him, why risk a gaffe? Why risk messing up when he can just stay out of them? It used to be said that debates or conventions had a big impact. It seems less so more and more, but they still do somewhat. Trump's debate performances seem to have hurt him both times, because they kind of fed into the idea, because he was really hostile, and it kind of and if you remember with regards to Hillary, was really confrontational, and then with Biden, had not allowed Biden to talk most of the time, and that kind of fed into the narrative that he could be at times unhinged. So it can hurt you a little bit, but I don't think in the long run it hurts that much. And historically, they talk about the JFK and the Nixon debate, and maybe that swung the election. That election was really close, so that maybe they still matter, but no, I don't think, because people's views are set, I don't think they matter as much. Negative ads. Are you tired of seeing negative ads? Well, guess what? They're successful. They're far more successful than positive ads, which is why everyone runs negative ads. And so part of that is our own fault for being the ones to allow those things to move us. Campaign funding is a big deal. I'm looking at the clock. I can't believe it's already 8.5 minutes. Voter turnout. It's real hard to get people to turn out to vote. It is so difficult. Even in presidential elections, it's only about 60% of the people vote, and much less than others. So there's so much. This chapter is just a lot of stuff. So for your assignment this week, I have another Frontline documentary from PBS. This one is The Plot to Overturn the Election. Since this chapter is about elections, and the 2020 election was the one, and now we're having some trials where the former President Donald Trump is on trial for plotting to overturn the election. That is, and these are criminal charges. So what is that about? If you haven't followed it closely, the episode of Frontline lays out what that's about, and it's a good episode. And it's based on facts, which is most important. So as usual, you're gonna watch that and do a reflective writing. And so I hope you learn a lot from that, and we'll see you next week.